The coastal town of Maple Bay lay tucked between rolling hills and the endless whisper of the Atlantic Ocean. Its streets were lined with old lampposts and maple trees that painted the sidewalks gold every autumn. Fishermen waved from their boats at dawn. Children chased seagulls near the pier, and every evening the sun melted into the sea like a promise of peace. To most, Maple Bay was just a small town. Quiet, slow, forgotten by the noise of big cities. But to Ethan Gray, it was a chance to disappear. By day, Ethan worked as a humble carpenter in a small workshop near the docks, building chairs, fixing fences, repairing window frames. His hands were rough, his jeans often stained with sawdust, and his cottage was small but warm. The locals saw him as a polite, quiet man, reserved, kind, and hardworking, but none of them knew the truth. Ethan Gray was a lie. His real name was Ethan Cole, billionaire CEO of Coltech Innovations, one of the largest technology firms in the United States. A man once chased by cameras, surrounded by luxury, envied by millions, and loved by no one. Because in the world he came from, love always came with conditions. Every woman who smiled at him saw his fortune before his face, his company before his soul. They said the words, "I love you," but what they meant was, "I love what you can give me." So one quiet morning, Ethan walked away from all of it, the skyscrapers, the spotlight, the noise. He took a new name, a small cottage by the shore, and a life that didn't need suits or secretaries. All he wanted now was truth, a love that would see the man, not the money. The first meeting. It happened on a breezy afternoon at Harbor Cafe, a cozy family-run diner near the pier, its windows fogged with steam and the smell of coffee drifting out to the street. Ethan had just finished a long day repairing an old fisherman's boat when he stepped inside, shaking off the ocean mist from his jacket. Behind the counter stood Grace Miller, a young woman with tired eyes and a smile that could still light up a room. Her brown hair was tied loosely back, and her apron bore the faint stains of coffee and care. "Table for one?" she asked warmly. Ethan nodded, his voice soft. "Yeah, just coffee, please." As she poured the steaming cup, he watched her quietly. The way she laughed with the regulars, how she leaned down to pick up a child's dropped spoon, how she apologized when the bell rang and she couldn't get to every table fast enough. She was graceful, gentle, a spark of kindness in a world that often forgot how to care. When the rush slowed, Grace stepped outside to sweep the porch. A gust of sea wind caught the door, slamming it against the frame with a sharp crack. "Oh no," she gasped, seeing the window hinge snap. Ethan rushed over. "Careful, let me see." He bent down, inspecting the damage, his fingers tracing the splintered wood. "It's just the frame," he said. "I can fix it. I'm good with tools." Grace hesitated. "You don't have to. It's my fault." He smiled faintly. "It'll take 5 minutes. Besides, I like helping." And in that simple act, one stranger fixing a window for another, something unspoken began. When he handed her the mended frame, she whispered, "Thank you." Ethan shrugged. "No charge. Consider it a neighbor's favor." But that small kindness stayed with Grace long after he left. And for Ethan, it was the first time in years someone had said thank you. Not for who he was, but for what he did. The bond grows days turned into weeks. Ethan became a regular at Harbor Cafe. Same table, same coffee, same smile from Grace. They began to talk. At first about the weather, the tides, the town's festivals. Then about dreams. Grace told him about her late father, a fisherman who taught her that hard work was worth more than gold. She spoke of her mother, Eleanor, whose health was failing, but whose spirit remained strong. "I work double shifts," Grace said one morning, pouring him coffee. "But it's okay. Mom always says, we don't need much, just enough to stay honest." Ethan listened, his heart tightening. This is the story of Ethan and Grace. Ethan was a billionaire, but he wasn't just any billionaire. He was a modern-day Romeo who believed that real love could only be found by those who weren't smothered in luxury. So he left his life of privilege, sold his mansion, and started a new life for himself in the small town of Maple Bay. There he bought a modest house and got a job as a carpenter, earning just enough to pay the bills and save the rest. He introduced himself to the locals as just Ethan, the new guy in town who loved working with wood. Little did they know he was actually Ethan Wilder, the famous billionaire. One day while strolling through the town, he met Grace, a beautiful young woman who worked at a local cafe. Unlike the other women Ethan had dated, Grace wasn't impressed by his looks or status. She was a down-to-earth kind of girl who worked hard and took pride in her simple life. What she admired most about Ethan was his sincerity and humility. As they spent more time together, Ethan found himself falling in love with Grace's honesty and kindness. He knew that she was the real deal, a woman who valued character over wealth. Meanwhile, Grace was also falling for Ethan. She had never met a man like him, a man who was so genuine and down-to-earth despite his obvious good looks and status. However, both of them were hiding something from each other. Ethan was still the billionaire, even if he didn't admit it, and Grace was struggling to make ends meet. She had been taking care of her sick mother who needed expensive medication that their small town didn't have. This put a huge financial strain on Grace, but she refused to give up. She worked extra shifts at the cafe and even took on a second job waiting tables. Still, it wasn't enough. Medical bills kept piling up and Grace felt like she was drowning in debt. One day, Ethan noticed that Grace was acting strangely. She seemed distant and preoccupied, and he was worried that something was wrong. When he confronted her, Grace broke down and told him about her mother's illness and their mounting debts. She was ashamed to admit that she was struggling, but Ethan was quick to reassure her. He told her not to worry, that everything would be fine. And true to his word, he disappeared the next day and returned with a bag full of money. He told Grace that he wanted to help her out because he cared about her. He didn't want her to work herself to the bone trying to pay for her mother's treatment. Grace was touched by Ethan's generosity, but she refused to accept the money. She didn't want to be a burden to Ethan, and she certainly didn't want his money to come between them. She told him that she could make it on her own, and that he shouldn't worry about her. Ethan was taken aback by Grace's refusal, but he respected her decision. He didn't want to force her to accept his help, and he knew that she was a strong, independent woman who didn't need a handout. Instead, he decided to do something else. He secretly paid off Grace's debt and made sure that her mother received the treatment she needed. He didn't tell Grace what he had done, though. He knew that she would never forgive him if she found out that he had used his money to help her. He didn't want her to marry him out of gratitude or pity. He wanted her to marry him because she loved him for who he was, not for what he had. When Grace realized that Ethan had secretly paid off her debts, she was furious. She confronted him, demanding to know why he had done it. She told him that she didn't need his money, and that she could have paid it off herself. Ethan simply smiled and told her that he wanted to help her. He didn't want her to suffer, and he knew that she was too proud to accept his help directly. Grace was touched by Ethan's thoughtfulness, but she still couldn't forgive him for overstepping her boundaries. She told him that she appreciated his gesture, but she would never let him pay for her mother's treatment. In the end, they reached a compromise. Grace agreed to let Ethan help her mother, but she insisted on paying him back. She didn't want to be a charity case, and she was determined to make Ethan understand that she was more than her circumstances. As the months went by, their bond grew stronger. They helped each other through tough times and supported each other through thick and thin. They fell deeply in love, and there was no doubt in their minds that they were meant to be together. And so when Ethan proposed to Grace, she said yes without hesitation. They had a small wedding ceremony in a local church, and although they didn't have much money, they didn't need it. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. The bride wore a simple white dress and the groom wore a dark suit. They borrowed rings from a friend and exchanged vows that they had written themselves. In their vows, they promised to love each other for better or worse, richer or poorer, and to honor and cherish each other always. They didn't need a fancy wedding or a big reception. They just needed each other and the love that they shared. No photographers, no guests, just two souls binding their futures with promises and faith. Afterwards, standing outside the chapel, Grace took Ethan's hand. "We don't need riches," she said softly. "We just need each other." Ethan pulled her into an embrace, whispering against her hair, "You're more than I ever dreamed of. But inside, a voice gnawed at him. She loves you for who you are. But would she forgive who you're not telling her you've been? Their marriage began with laughter and candlelight dinners of soup and bread. They lived in Ethan's small seaside cottage, its walls old but filled with warmth. Grace worked long shifts at Harbor Cafe, while Ethan built furniture for local stores and repaired boats for fishermen. Evenings were spent side by side, Grace humming as she cooked, Ethan sanding wood near the window. Sometimes they'd sit outside watching the sunset, holding hands in silence. But simplicity came with struggle. Bills piled up. Grace's mother's medicines cost more each month. The fridge often stood half empty. Yet every hardship drew them closer, Grace always smiling, always grateful. One night, as they sat eating soup by candlelight, Ethan apologized softly. "You deserve better, Grace. More than this." She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "Better isn't about money, Ethan. Better is peace. Better is a man who keeps his word." Her faith in him was unshakable, and it broke him a little more each day because behind every promise was a truth he was still hiding. One afternoon, while serving customers at the cafe, Grace noticed a sleek black Mercedes pull up. Out stepped Ryan Blake, tall, polished, and wearing a suit that cost more than her yearly salary. He smiled charmingly as he took a seat by the window. "Coffee, please," he said, his voice confident. Grace served him politely, unaware that his eyes followed her every move. Over the next few days, Ryan returned often, ordering the same coffee he barely drank. He asked about her life, her dreams, her struggles. When he learned of her mother's illness and her husband's modest work, he leaned forward, voice silky. "You have a rare grace, Grace. You shouldn't be living like this. I could help you. A better home, security, comfort. You deserve that." She smiled kindly but shook her head. "I don't need better things, I need a better heart, and I already have one." Ryan sighed, persistent. "You think love can fill a fridge? Pay for doctors?" Grace's eyes softened. "Maybe not, but love gives me strength to face what money can't." He stared at her for a long moment, finally murmuring, "You're loyal. Maybe to a fault." When Ethan heard whispers of Ryan's visits, his heart tightened, not from jealousy but from guilt. Grace was turning down every luxury he secretly possessed. She was proving her love, while he hid behind a lie. That night, as she slept peacefully beside him, Ethan stared at the ceiling, tears sliding down silently. "You deserve the truth," he whispered, "but I'm afraid the truth might break the one thing I've always wanted. Your trust." Days later, while cleaning their cottage, Grace opened a drawer and found a sleek black phone. Modern, expensive, unlike anything they owned. Curious, she pressed the button. The screen lit up. A message blinked. "Board meeting rescheduled. Investors await your confirmation, Mr. Cole." Her heart skipped. Mr. Cole? When Ethan came home that evening, tired and covered in sawdust, she held out the phone quietly. "Ethan, who's Mr. Cole?" He froze. For a split second, panic crossed his face. Then he forced a smile. "Oh, that's an old job. I used to do office work before carpentry." Grace frowned. "Office work with board meetings and investors?" He walked to her, cupping her face gently. "It doesn't matter anymore. That life's behind me. What matters is us." She wanted to believe him. Her heart said yes, but a seed of doubt had been planted, tiny, invisible, but growing. That night, as she sat by her mother's bedside, Grace whispered, "Mom, do you think love can survive secrets?" Her mother smiled weakly. "If love is true, secrets will find their way out, when hearts are ready." This is the story of Grace. She was a humble woman who worked at the local Harbor Cafe. She was known for her warm smile and her kind heart. But what people didn't know was that she was deeply in love with the man who worked alongside her, Ethan. He was a skilled carpenter with a mysterious past. One day, Grace decided to confess her love to Ethan. They shared a kiss under the old oak tree by the harbor. It was there that they realized they had been in love all along. Soon after, they decided to get married. They saved money for a small ceremony at the local chapel. Their wedding was beautiful, although their means were modest. After the wedding, the young couple moved into Ethan's cozy seaside cottage. They worked hard to make ends meet. Ethan used his carpentry skills to make furniture while Grace served in the cafe. They were happy, but their joy was often tinged with the worry of making enough money to pay for Grace's mother's medical treatment. Her mother was sick and the expenses were piling up. One day, a wealthy businessman named Ryan Blake became a regular at the cafe. He was successful, charming, and used to getting what he wanted. He soon set his sights on Grace. He began visiting the cafe every day, showering her with compliments and expensive gifts. He took her to fancy restaurants and introduced her to a world of luxury. Ryan was persistent and he didn't take no for an answer. He was head over heels in love with Grace and couldn't understand why she didn't feel the same way about him. He tried everything to win her over, but Grace was resolute. She had found true love with Ethan, and nothing, not even Ryan's wealth, could change that. Meanwhile, Ethan was oblivious to Ryan's intentions. He trusted Grace completely and had no idea that she was being tempted by a rich, powerful man. One evening, as Grace was closing the cafe, she found a phone. It was expensive and made of pure gold. She knew it wasn't just any phone. It was a luxury brand. When Ethan came to collect it the next day, she confronted him. She told him she found the phone and asked why it had messages addressed to Mr. Cole. At first, Ethan was evasive. He tried to change the subject, but Grace was insistent. She wanted to know the truth. As Grace dug deeper, she discovered more secrets about Ethan. Who was Mr. Cole? Was Ethan hiding something from her? Had he lied to her about something? She confronted him with her discovery. This time, Ethan broke down. He confessed that he wasn't just an ordinary carpenter. He was, in fact, Mr. Cole. He had chosen to hide his wealth and live a simple life. He had done so to escape the pressures of his old life and to find happiness in the simplicity of his work and his love for Grace. Overwhelmed with emotion, Grace listened to Ethan's story. She learned that he had a past full of privilege but also pain. His father had been a wealthy businessman, but had passed away when Ethan was young. His mother had struggled to raise him and his siblings, and he had always felt the burden of expectations. That was why he had run away from home years ago, determined to make his own way in the world. He had fallen in love with Grace almost immediately. He had seen her serving in the cafe, and her kindness and sincerity had struck him. He had never met a woman like her, and he knew he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. He had been too afraid to tell her the truth, knowing that his wealth would only push her away. But now, with their relationship hanging in the balance, he had no choice but to come clean. As Grace absorbed this new information, she couldn't help but feel a surge of love for Ethan. His honesty, humility, and integrity shone through in his confession. His decision to live a simple life with her, far from the glitz and glamour of his former life, meant more to her than any amount of wealth ever could. Now, faced with the truth of Ethan's identity, Grace had a decision to make. Would she continue to love a man who, while still poor in spirit, was actually rich? Or would she walk away, preserving her love for him but breaking his heart in the process? Hello, friends. It was love at first sight. When Grace met Ethan Cole, it felt like they had known each other forever. They fell deeply in love and soon tied the knot. However, there was one thing that bothered her. He never let her see his face. Always wearing sunglasses and a hat, he claimed it was because of a childhood accident. But she saw more sadness in his eyes than pain. She loved him so much that she didn't even question it. A few months after their marriage, Grace's mom was diagnosed with cancer. Despite having no money for treatment, Grace refused to let her mom go. She pawned all of her jewelry and called Ryan, her wealthy ex-boyfriend who had proposed to her before she met Ethan. Though he had moved on, he still cared for her and readily offered to pay for her mother's treatment. Ethan wasn't happy about it, but Grace was grateful for Ryan's help. Unfortunately, her mother passed away despite the surgery. Overwhelmed with grief, Grace leaned on Ryan for support, which made Ethan furious. He started drinking and stayed out late, returning home drunk and accusing Grace of betraying him. One night he shoved her and called her a slut. In a fit of rage, she slapped him. For the first time, he took off his hat and sunglasses, revealing not the handsome stranger she had married, but an ordinary carpenter named Gray. Stunned and heartbroken, Grace left him, seeking solace in Ryan's unwavering support. A week later, Grace was going through old newspapers when she found one that changed everything. The article from 6 years ago detailed the sudden emergence of a brilliant young engineer named Ethan Cole, who had shocked the tech world by launching a revolutionary new app. It went on to say that he was known for his good looks and charming smile, always wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. Her heart sank as she realized that the man she had loved and lost was actually this famous billionaire. She confronted him, demanding answers. He admitted that he was Ethan Cole, but insisted that nothing had changed. He loved only her, he said, and removed his glasses, revealing the same sad eyes she had seen before. But now she saw them through a different lens. All their intimate moments, the wedding vows, the promises whispered in the dark, they were all a lie. Her stomach twisted as she realized that the child she was carrying was not his. She was carrying a part of another man inside her, a constant reminder of her betrayal. Overwhelmed with conflicting emotions, Grace stumbled back, accidentally knocking over the glass of water on the table. As she watched the liquid spread across the floor, she felt her world shattering into a million pieces. Tears streamed down her face, blurring the sharp edges of her pain. With a trembling voice, she asked, "How could you do this to me? How could you deceive me for all this time?" Ethan's heart broke at the sight of her tears. He knew he had hurt her deeply, but he couldn't bring himself to tell the truth. Not because he was a bad person, but because his reasons were too complicated. He explained how he had been hiding his identity to protect her from the prying eyes of the media and his overprotective family. He wanted to build a life with her based on their genuine love, not his status or wealth. But now his carefully constructed world was crumbling down around him. Seeing the pain he had caused her, Ethan's resolve wavered. Maybe he should have told her the truth from the beginning, he thought, his heart heavy with regret. But it was too late for that now. All he could do was hope that she would forgive him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, reaching out to touch her, but she flinched away from him. His eyes pleaded for understanding, but her gaze was distant, lost in the labyrinth of her own thoughts. Would she ever forgive him? Would she give him another chance? Or was their love story destined to end here, shattered by the weight of his deception? Hi everyone, welcome to our channel. And today we have a great story for you about a guy who pretended to be poor and how he got a big surprise at the end. Enjoy. Grace was a simple woman living a pure life with her mother in a small town. She had a boyfriend named Ethan who worked as a carpenter and seemed like an honest guy. But Grace didn't know that Ethan was hiding something from her. He was actually a millionaire who had inherited a huge fortune from his father. But he didn't tell Grace because he wanted to see if she would love him for himself or for his money. But he made a mistake. When Grace's mom fell sick, Ethan should have used his money to help, but he didn't. Instead, he told Grace that he was just a poor carpenter's son and that she shouldn't rely on him. So Grace had to borrow money from her rich aunt to pay for her mom's treatment. When her mom recovered, Grace confronted Ethan and threw him out of the house. Later, she heard from others that Ethan was actually rich and felt betrayed by him. Still, she didn't want his money and only wanted the truth. However, Ethan didn't come back to apologize and explain why he lied. 6 months passed, and one day Grace decided to move to the city. She left the house empty and broke, thinking that Ethan would regret losing her. Meanwhile, Ethan did feel bad about what he did, but he was too proud to admit it. He kept replaying the breakup in his mind, blaming himself for not being honest from the start. One day, Ethan visited the house he shared with Grace. It was empty and he felt sad knowing that he was the reason for it. Suddenly, he had an idea. He called a real estate agent and put the house up for sale. Then he took all his possessions to a storage unit, including the wedding ring that Grace had left behind. As the months passed, the wound in Grace's heart slowly healed. She started working at a bookstore, which was her dream job. She met a kind man there named Oliver who liked her a lot. Soon they became a couple and moved in together. Meanwhile, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Grace. He missed her so much that he sometimes went to the storage unit just to sit among his belongings, hoping to feel closer to her. One day, Ethan went to the city to buy some supplies. As he was walking down the street, he noticed a building with the name Eleanor Miller written on it. He went inside and saw that it was a charity organization. He asked someone working there what it was, and they told him it was set up by the richest man in town, who wanted to help people in need in honor of his mother. The man even donated his entire fortune for this cause. Ethan felt shocked and realized that the man was himself. He couldn't believe he had forgotten about such a thing, but he felt happy knowing that his mom's memory was being honored. At that moment, Ethan's phone rang. It was his lawyer asking him to come to his office. When he arrived, the lawyer told him that everything was ready. He had sold the house and transferred all the money to the foundation. He also gave Ethan a box with some documents. Suddenly, Grace entered the office. She was going to meet her boss when she heard the news. She couldn't believe that Ethan was the rich man who had donated his fortune. She thought he was a liar and a coward who had abandoned her. When Ethan saw Grace, his eyes filled with tears. He wanted to speak, but she cut him off, saying that she didn't want to hear anything from him. Grace left the office crying. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Ethan and wondering why he had hidden his wealth from her. She knew that he had a good heart, but she was confused by his actions. The next morning, Grace went to work. She tried to be strong but couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. She wondered if he was sad about what happened between them. At noon, Grace went to the bookstore's cafe to get some lunch. She opened her laptop and sat down when suddenly it started raining heavily. Grace looked out the window and saw that the rain was getting stronger. She wanted to go home, but it was too far to walk in this weather. At that moment, Grace's phone rang. It was Oliver asking if he could pick her up from work. She declined the offer, saying that she would stay at the cafe until the rain stopped. Just then, Grace saw a familiar figure outside the window. It was Ethan. He was standing in the rain holding an umbrella. Grace couldn't believe her eyes. She watched as he walked into the cafe, his clothes soaked in water. He looked at Grace and said, "I know this is sudden, but can I talk to you? I have something important to say." Grace hesitated, but eventually nodded her head. They went outside to a secluded place where no one could hear them. Ethan began speaking, but his voice trembled with emotion. "I haven't seen you since we broke up, and I'm sorry for that. I know it's been a long time, but I still love you, and I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." "Why did you lie to me?" Grace asked, her voice shaking. "You never told me you were rich. If you had been honest, things might have turned out differently." "I'm sorry, Grace. I wanted to know if you loved me for myself or for my money. I never meant to hurt you. I was selfish and wrong to do that. I know that now. Please believe me," Ethan pleaded, tears streaming down his face. "But you broke my trust. I can't forgive you for that," Grace replied, her eyes filled with pain. "I understand, Grace. You have every right to be angry with me. But please listen to me. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to make things right. I love you. And if you give me another chance, I promise I will never lie to you again. We can start over and build a future together based on honesty and trust. I know it won't be easy to earn your trust, but I'm willing to work for it. I'm in love with you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Grace looked into Ethan's tearful eyes and saw the sincerity in them. She knew that he was a good man who had made a mistake. She had loved him from the bottom of her heart and couldn't deny her feelings any longer. "I love you too, Ethan. I just needed to hear the truth from you," Grace confessed, tears streaming down her face. They embraced each other tightly, and at that moment, all the pain and suffering they had endured seemed to vanish. They had found their way back to each other through honesty and trust. From that day on, Grace and Ethan were inseparable. They rebuilt their relationship on solid ground, promising to always be honest with each other. They knew that their love was worth fighting for and that nothing, not even money, could come between them. Their love story became a beacon of hope and inspiration for everyone around them, reminding them that true love conquers all.